Alright, welcome back to part 3 of Asteroids. If you have not watched the video about classes, if you want to just pause this one, go watch that one. Otherwise, we're going to start, and that's going to be our topic for today, is classes and how we program them. So in the video you watched, they talk about classes being a blueprint, and that's exactly what they are. You're making a blueprint for an object, and then since you have the blueprint, you can duplicate that object as many times as you want. So one thing we've been doing is we've been writing all of our code in this one file, and today we're going to actually move some of that code into a new class called the player class. So what we're going to do is this little arrow at the top by the name Asteroids, you're going to hit new tab, and we're going to call this capital P player. And what this is going to be doing, the tabs are actually new files in processing. And then in this new file, we can declare a class. So how we're going to do that in Java is we're going to do player, or we're going to do class space player, and then we're going to do curly brackets to open and close it. Now we have our class. So in our class, we're going to have a couple things that we're going to need to do. We're going to declare a variable section with some comments, and then we are going to declare a constructor. And so how you do that is you declare a function with the name of the class. And so what a constructor is whenever you make a new object of a player, this is the code that's going to run first. Okay, so you declare a variable, you say you're going to make a new player, whatever code you put in this constructor, which is the same name as your class, is what's going to run first. So the other things that we're going to do is we are going to set up a public void update function. This is where we're going to put all of our code for updating, and then we're going to have a public void render function. And this is where we're going to put all of our code for rendering the player object. So one thing we haven't talked about too is you might see like names like public and private. So basically the difference is if I have a public function or variable, that means that anything that can see that object can see that function. Whereas if I have a private one, you can only use, so if I had this as private, let's just say for instance, right, I have a private update function, only the player inside the player class, inside these brackets, could I call the update function. Whereas as you'll see later, we're going to be calling this update function inside of this asteroids file. So we have our player class right now, and we have all of our areas. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to, I think there's a way where you can split these. Alright, well, I did not find a way to split these, so we're just going to have to go back and forth. And you guys will be able to pause and rewind the video if you need to see what I did again. So what we're going to do, all of these variables are all pertaining to the player. So I'm going to hit Control X to cut them out, and then we are going to paste them with Control V into the player class. And if you hit Control T, it'll automatically redo your formatting, so you don't have to go through and add a bunch of spaces. So then, remember how I said this void setup is like what's going to run first when we run our program? That's the exact same as kind of like that constructor. Like this is the constructor for the main program. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all of that code that was in void setup, and we're going to put it into the player constructor. And then, as you see, we have our update and our render functions. So everything in the update function for our main program is going to go in our player. Right there. I like these. You will see this, like this was. This is a perfectly fine way to format if-else-if statements. Personally, I like to have all of my if statements on separate lines. And this is something that you'll you'll get your own taste for. Some people even don't like to have their curly brackets um, on the end of a if statement like that. They like to give their curly brackets their own lines. Um, it's really up to you as long as you keep your formatting the same. But if you do want to use that Control T, it's going to change. Like if I put this curly bracket down and I put that else if down, it's going to change this back up. But looks like you can keep that. So if you like that better, you can do that. Sometimes it's easier to read and sometimes it's not, depending on who you are. So we moved all of our update stuff in there. And then what we're going to do is all of our render from this push and pop, we are going to move into our player class. Control T, get the spacing right. So that is everything that we need to move to our player class. Okay, so this is player class moved. So now what we need to do is we need to make a player object inside of our main function. So what we're going to do is we're going to declare a new player. And this is the really cool thing about classes. So remember how we have over here, we have these different variable types like float, int, we have boolean, string. By making a new class, we have made a new variable type called player. And so this is the new variable player, and then we're giving it a name. I'm going to call it lowercase p player. And then in setup, where we were instantiating our variables, this is where I'm going to call the variable player. I'm going to say it's equal to a new player with the constructor function. Okay, so this constructor function where I'm saying it's equal to a new player, that's basically saying we need a player object and we're going to run all of this code first, and it's going to have all of these variables inside this lowercase p player. Okay, so then what we can do is if we want to access any of the public functions in the player object, we can do that by just saying player dot update, and that period is an accessor. So we're saying we want the update function inside of the player object, and it's going to be the same for the render function, player dot render, and that's good to go. So one thing you do notice is we have this is rotating, and this is what we were deciding to do to determine if we were moving left, right, or staying still. So in our player object, that's where the is rotating is now. So what we need to do is we need to say player dot is rotating, because now that variable is in the player class. So we can just copy and paste player dot into all those. And if I'm not mistaken, this should work perfectly fine. And look at that. Now we have our player. We move it around. So one thing that you can also do with constructors, and we'll probably talk about this some more later, is that if you put parameters on your constructor, so let's say you wanted to make something with different like position, you can put parameters in this function, and then when you make a new one, you just have to put like what you want those parameters to be when you're making a new player. And I think we're going to do that later when we make the lasers and possibly the asteroids. Okay, so that's the end of part 3. One thing I did want to mention is that I'm sorry if my audio and the video aren't syncing up. I noticed in video 2 it got a little bit behind. The audio was ahead by about 5-7 seconds or so. So sorry if that messes you up. Hopefully it's not too bad and you guys can follow along pretty easily. But remember to save your code right now. You can hit Control S and it'll save it in the same spot that is saved before. And I will see you in part 4. Oh, and make sure that you grab me or Mr. Lavin, and we mark you off for part 3.